As we get started this morning, I want to thank just the diversity of different voices that we get to hear in here on a weekly basis. Let's give it up for Corey and Elizabeth one more time. They did just such an excellent job, and I'm so thankful for this space that allows different voices to be heard from the microphone, different voices to take front stage for singing. It's just an excellent example of what we mean here when we say that we're affirming and inclusive, that we celebrate that diversity. Now, while we celebrate that type of diversity here at the venues, I think there is probably one time that in many of our lives, we experience a type of diversity that might have been a little bit awkward. If you've ever gone to college or had a domestic partner of some sort, you probably have a roommate story. This is that type of diversity where, maybe they just don't do the things the way that you would choose to do those things, right? Maybe they load the dishwasher a little bit differently, or maybe they don't ever change their sheets. That was a roommate story of mine that was really awful. But one thing that was really unique about my roommate stories was this. When I was in grad school, most of my roommates had a very particular characteristic that I shared with them, and that was that many of us were magicians. Basically, our house was like Hogwarts, if Hogwarts was still acceptable. Brent did rope magic. I did card magic. And then there was this guy that we called Squiddy, and he did stage illusions, okay? And so, like I said, if magic was cool, our house would have been the coolest place around. And while there are all kinds of magic tricks out there, one specific type that I find very interesting is this type called dual reality. It has this notion that the audience experiences one thing and that the people on stage experience something differently. And you might imagine that's true for like the magician or the magician's assistant. But there's one time when this actually happens where you call someone on stage and they see or experience something that is very different than what the audience is experiencing. A few years ago, there was an example of this that got performed on America's Got Talent by an act known as David and Lehman, and they did this dual reality trick on Howie Mandel. And so I want you to take just a few minutes and see how this trick actually plays out. We'll show it up on the screen.
If I squeeze here, you lose the ability to play the piano. Can you play the piano?
No.
Ladies and gentlemen, amazing. Thank you. If I squeeze here, you lose the ability to do a standing backflip. Can you do a standing backflip?
No.
A miracle. And if I squeeze here, you can no longer read.
That's right. We brought these cards with words written on, and these words all pertain to you, Howie. Okay?
I will once again pressure Fernal you.
You what?
I'm gonna squeeze your head.
Taking away his ability to read.
Can now no longer read.
Right. Judges, yes or no? Can you read this word?
Yes.
Yes. Howie, yes or no? Can you read this?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead and sound it out.
What's not? Cannot.
It's okay, but judges, you can read this, right?
Yes.
Now, this is weird, right? Now, to make sure we're not doing anything tricky, we have a camera. Can the camera come in here?
Is it a word?
Yes.
It's a word you know. See, you're screwing with me.
No.
Show me it.
We'll show you.
We'll show you.
Okay.
Judges, yes or no? Can you read this?
Yes.
It's a word you know.
Yes. It's a word you know.
Okay.
Howie, yes or no? Can you read this?
Corn poops.
What is it?
Gora poops.
People at home.
Gora, you can read that. You can read that. They can read it. They can read it.
But you
Gora
can read,
poops?
you can read this.
Why is that a word you know? What does Gora poops mean?
One more, yes?
Yes.
Howie, just this last one. What is this one?
Havlo mono.
That trick works, and it's sort of like turning on the lights. I'm not going to reveal that, but I actually love that trick. Yeah, I'm sorry. It's one of those International Brotherhood of Magicians things that I've sworn to secrecy, and if they do, they'll kick me out. But the truth is, there have definitely been times that I feel like that I'm a part of that trick, right? I feel like there's this thing where it seems like everyone else is in on the joke, and I don't. I don't get it. I don't see what's going on. Or even maybe more descriptively, I feel like there are two realities that are happening all the time, and I feel like at times I'm being pulled into both of them. There's a part of me that feels like Howie up on stage where I'm just like, I don't have any idea what's going on. And then there's this other part where I'm just like, oh yeah, I don't understand why people don't have everything figured out yet. And I don't know if you ever feel that way or not, but when things seem to go like that, it can be incredibly overwhelming. And so as we are in our series called Cutting Through the Stress, I think it might be helpful this morning for us to think about some ways that when we are super overwhelmed, that on a very macro level, we might be able to figure out ways to come together as a community and kind of resolve that. Over the next several weeks, as we're continuing this discussion, one of the pieces of source material that we have been looking at is this book by Jonathan Haidt called The Anxious Generation. And I would say this about this book, is that especially with the fact that if you have kids who are going to be starting back to school this week, and it'll be the first week that they haven't had the ability to have cell phones in school, this book is an excellent resource for you to use. If you need access to it, it's free on Spotify Premium. You can listen to the book, and it's an excellent source for that. And Jonathan Haidt starts off the book by saying this central claim. He says, my central claim in this book is that there are these two trends: overprotection in the real world and underprotection in the virtual world are the major reasons why children born after 1995 became the anxious generation. And while Jonathan Haidt's arguments throughout the book are often focused on Gen Z and why that has become the anxious generation, in his words, I think it's important for us, each of us, to think about the ways that we can cut through the stress and the overwhelm together, and how there are often multiple forces, almost a dual reality of sorts, that we face regardless of if we were born before 1995 or since. You know, I think even our language, on a very basic level, expresses this. I know that I have said these phrases a lot, and my guess is that you have too. How often we have said phrases like, I feel like I'm burning the candle at both ends, or maybe almost the opposite reaction, which is, I feel like I'm being pulled in all directions. Those are the types of overwhelming feelings that can happen to us all. And so my hope today is that we will find a way collectively to cut through that stress that seems to be pulling all the time, all the way. And I hope that as we do so, that we can start with this big idea, that the antidote to overwhelm is to be the gatekeeper of your attention, not a bystander. Okay, that's going to be kind of the place that we're going to land at the end of this discussion this morning, okay? That the antidote to overwhelm is to be the gatekeeper of your attention and not a bystander. And we're going to unpack this morning by looking at a story that comes out of the Christian New Testament. And it's a story that many people kind of think of as a magic trick as well. It's a story that shows up in the Christian Bible in a couple of different spaces, largely because most of the first 4 books of the New Testament, the Gospels, were copied off of each other. But Matthew, which is the version that we're going to be looking at, it's the very first book of the New Testament, and his articulation of this is the one that we're going to look at because it has some very specific aspects that I think can help us deal with the overwhelm that many of us are experiencing. Just for context, at this point in the story, Jesus and his disciples, or his closest followers, have been recently learning about a bunch of major events. Okay, so they just learned about the death of one of their predecessors, John the Baptist or John the Baptizer, which was a really devastating thing. And then Jesus goes out and feeds 5,000 people using only one kid's lunch. Okay, and so they have this really low, and then they have this really high. And I imagine for many of us, we exist in those spaces all the time, right? We watch the news and we see the things that are going on with Gaza or with ICE raids. And then we juxtapose that to the reality that Taylor Swift is coming out with a new album. And we see these like super lows and super highs that are happening. And it's almost Like we want them to be able to cancel each other out, but they don't. It's almost like they just seem to add to each other. And that's the context that Matthew writes this story where Jesus made the disciples take some time away. He says, go get in a boat and go be by yourself. I'm going to go over and pray and be by myself. And while they were doing this, things got really shocking because Jesus came out to them. And this is the part of the story that most people focus on, but it's not the part of the story we're going to look at today. The Bible tells us that Jesus comes to them as they're spending some time by themselves by walking on the water. Okay, and the way that this is actually written about is that it's almost like Jesus is calming the storm behind him as he's walking on the water towards them. Sort of like if you've ever driven through Springfield at all and you've seen it like rain on one side of the street and not on the other side, that's kind of the context, which is why as the followers of Jesus are sitting on this boat, which don't think like yacht, think like a couple of canoes tied together, they are seeing this and they're like, oh my goodness, is that a ghost? And so as this happens, as they're seeing this whole thing, trying to figure out, are they just dreaming or what's going on, that this guy named Peter chooses a different path. And that's actually where we're going to start today's story. It shows up in Matthew 14, verses 28 and 29, and it says this, that Peter answered him, meaning Jesus, and says, Lord, if it's you, command me to come to you on the water. And Jesus said, come. So Peter got out of the boat and started walking on the water and came toward Jesus. And while a lot of times we look at this as a faith step, and I've heard like this, you can never move anywhere without stepping out of the boat, that's also not this teaching. The reality is that what Peter was experiencing in that moment is very similar to what I think a lot of us experience. He was experiencing something that was brand new, something that he had never seen before. You see, he'd never seen someone walk on the water, and he'd not read the Gospels yet, so he didn't know that was possible. But I think, like a lot of us, we felt in this space of, I just want to check out what this new thing is, which moves me to kind of the first step to prove this whole antidote piece, which is this, that things that are new and unknown are constantly pulling for our attention. Things that are new and unknown are constantly pulling for our attention. And I'm sure that you have seen this happen, but Peter sees Jesus and determines that he has to fully investigate what's been going on. Now, in leadership circles and in leadership books, especially in like Christian leadership world, there have been countless books that tried to figure out what leadership type Peter was. Okay, he was probably an Enneagram 8. He probably had the big E at the beginning of the Myers-Briggs test, and if you look at his DISC test, it would have shown that he was a great leader. But one thing that is true about Peter, that's probably true about all of us, is that we seem to have this desire to see what the next new thing is. Jonathan Haidt describes this very well when he talks about this anxious generation by saying this, that there is frankly insufficient protection in the new digital environment. This is a digital environment with powerful distorting effects on basic psychological processes such as motivation or attention. This is because social networks operate by co-opting the dopamine/reward circuits of the mesolimbic pathway of the brain. This occurs through intermittent reinforcement schedules. On a very basic level, what Haidt is saying here is that our desire to explore, our desire to constantly doom scroll, to go to the next Facebook reel or the next TikTok or whatever it is the exact same psychological reason that Peter was engaging in. This notion of intermittent reinforcement schedules, or the idea that sometimes, even if the next thing that we look at isn't great, maybe the next one after that will be. And we're willing to keep doing it because we don't know when that one that's going to capture our attention is going to happen. It's the same reason that people will sit at slot machines all day long, is because they don't win every time, right? They like that possibility that it might not work out even the majority of the time because they are excited about the random chance that it might. And while most of us aren't sitting around and seeing ghosts and deciding whether or not we should jump out of a boat, we need to remember that billions and billions of dollars are spent literally every day trying to get our eyeballs to do this thing where we doom scroll or while we continue to flip through whatever video it is that we're looking at. And when you add that on top of the demands that we have from our families, our jobs, trying to stay somewhat mentally and or physically healthy, etc., there's no wonder that most of us feel overwhelmed. So this morning, I want to spend like 20 seconds doing something very specifically. I think it might be helpful for us this morning to breathe. If you have your phone out, maybe put it in your pocket for just a second or set it on the chair next to you. Maybe close your eyes for a second, maybe put your feet on the floor. And just breathe. Breathe in through your nose and out through your mouth. And remember that right now, that while there are thousands of pieces of stimuli that are competing for your attention, the phone that you can feel even though you're not touching it, the way that right now you feel either hot or cold, or your thoughts right now about if your kids are having a good time back in KV, which they are, I want to give you a sentence that I want you to remember, and you can look up here on the screen and see it, and it's this: that while the world around you can pull your attention, you can choose where to put it. While the world around you can pull your attention, that you can choose where to put it. Look, that's not to say that all things that pull our attention are bad, right? When your kid is hungry and they cry, feed them, please. When Jesus comes walking on the water, it's not bad that Peter wants to jump out and go meet him. If you're walking through Red Rocks and there's that awesome coat that's made out of a quilt and it draws your attention, you're like, I have to wear this. Fine, yes, do it. Right, Whitney? Yeah. It's not a bad choice. But remember, we can choose where we put our attention. And that's really important as the story continues, because in the next few verses it says this, that when Peter noticed the strong wind, he became frightened. And beginning to sink, he cried out, Lord, save me. And Jesus immediately reached out his hand and caught him, saying, you have little faith. Why did you doubt? And this checks out, right? You've got this great idea, something new and exciting is out there, something catches your eye and you're off just to realize that you're in over your head. I don't know if you felt this way before. I feel it all the time, by the way. And remember earlier when Peter said that he was going to head out, Jesus just says, come. But here, Jesus does this thing that at first glance seems a little awkward, not going to lie. Jesus looks at him and instead of being like, oh, it's okay, we got this, he looks at him and says, oh, you have little faith, which seems almost like a scold. Except that I'm not sure that it was. James Rowe Adams, who's an Episcopalian priest, breaks down this word saying, you have little faith, by noting this, that the word that is used there, oligopistoi, has this kind of teasing or bantering quality to it that Jesus reserves for his most intimate associates. Apparently, Jesus did not care to spend much time with people of great faith, but instead surrounded himself with those of little faith. Non-religious people might have much to learn from Jesus if they can see him as a friend to those who do not have much faith. So maybe what Jesus is saying here to Peter isn't that he wasn't following the right religion, or that he wasn't following the right dogmas, or that he didn't have the right faith type of doubt, but rather something else entirely. And that's the second thing that I want to kind of share with you this morning, that this doubt that Peter had is different than some of the other types of doubt that we talk about. Because doubt that results in humility is different from doubt that results in distraction. Let me say that again. Doubt that results in humility is different from doubt that results in distraction. We love curiosity and skepticism and doubt here at the Vineyards. We think it's awesome because it puts us in a space to say, I don't know what's going on. And that is a good type of doubt. And if Peter's problem here was that he wasn't religious, then what is the problem? You see, I don't think Jesus got upset at Peter because he had little faith, but rather he notes that he was distracted. The word that Jesus uses here is the word distazo, which comes from two different parts of a word. The first part, dis, meaning to, like I'm dissecting something. And the word stazo, which is where we get our word stance or homeostasis or static. In other words, and I could be wrong about this, by the way, But maybe the problem was that Peter wanted so much to live in multiple worlds that he was unwilling to commit to either side. I really appreciate the way that Amy Linderman Allen says this. She says, perhaps Peter was a bit more of a people person. I wonder if between the crowded comfort of the others in the fishing boat and the steady embrace of his teacher coming toward him on the sea, that Peter suddenly realized not just that he was walking on water, but that he was doing so alone. While the boat and Jesus both offered a very different kind of security, they were nonetheless two ends of a pole. And there in the water, Peter was connected to neither of them. I wonder how often that is what makes us feel overwhelmed when we try something new. Maybe Peter was stuck between the two sides that were pulling him, the way that the candle was burning on both ends, the way the dual reality was shaping up. He had been there with his friends in the boat, in the comfort of being around other people that he loved. And I will tell you, that is a sacred and holy space. And it would have been fine for him to have stayed there. And he saw his teacher coming towards him and decided to chase after this new thing and go see Jesus. And that is also a sacred and holy place. And I often think that it's in that liminal space that water literally is, between multiple good things, that we often find ourselves overwhelmed. You know, we don't typically find ourselves overwhelmed when we're trying to make a decision between a good thing and a bad thing. That's an easy decision to make. Do the good thing. Where we often find ourselves overwhelmed is when we're trying to decide between two good things or two bad things. And we kind of get stuck in that space. We're trying to figure these things out. Which of the two good things or which of the two bad things do I take on? When I was a teacher in Marshfield, I had the opportunity for a couple of years to be the coordinator for gifted education for the middle school and high school students. And one of the years, the middle schoolers came to me and they said, you know, we'd really like to do the science experiment because we think that we're really good at multitasking, and we often hear you say it's not possible. So can we do a science experiment so that we can prove you wrong? I said, sure. So we designed this science experiment that went like this. At first, the students would sit in front of their computer and they would do a little typing test for a minute so we could get kind of a baseline at how many words per minute they could type accurately. Then, for phase 2, I would start asking them general knowledge questions while they were typing. Things like, who was the first president of the United States? What city do you live in? Those kind of things. For phase 3, they were typing and answering general knowledge questions, and we started playing some music behind them that had words in it. And then on phase 4, we turned it all the way up to where they were typing, answering general knowledge questions, having music play in the background, and then I would ask them questions about the music. What was interesting about this, as you might imagine, is that as we added different tasks, they would start getting confused. They would start to type the words that I was asking, or they would start answering questions like, who was the first president of the United States, by saying Puff the Magic Dragon. They got so confused. And what the students did in that point was actually prove what scientists at the University of London found. A study at the University of London found that participants who multitasked during cognitive tasks experienced IQ score declines that were similar to what they'd expect if they had smoked marijuana or stayed up all night. IQ drops of 15 points for multitasking men lowered their scores to the average rating of an 8-year-old child. And by the way, that's only with one multitasking task. Most studies find that when you stack them, it gets exponentially worse. So maybe that's what Jesus was saying to Peter. Look, you're trying to be both here and not here. You're trying to both hold on and jump off. You're trying to come to me and stay in the boat. In other words, your doubt is not humility, your doubt is distraction. And I wonder how often we find ourselves in that space because we feel overwhelmed, not because we have too much to do, but because we're not accomplishing anything. Because we're told that everything is a priority. And I have a friend who says it this way. He says that when everything is important, nothing is important. But that's not where the story of Jesus ends. It doesn't necessarily end up in the space that I would like it. You know, I would love it if Jesus looked at Peter and said, all right, if at first you don't succeed, the American dream is you try and you try and you try again. But I don't think Jesus was super interested in the American dream. Because in verse 31, he says this, when they climbed into the boat, the wind died down, and those who were in the boat worshiped him, saying, truly you are the Son of God. See, after Jesus grabbed him and dragged him in the boat, they were together as a community. When Peter was finding all these distractions, when Peter was engaged in all kinds of doubt, Jesus did the thing that I think is so important. He brought him to community. And that's the last thing I want to share this morning, and that's this. That collective action can help us push against distraction. That collective action can help us push against distraction. I've often heard that in groups, joy is multiplied and sorrow is divided. I think the same thing is true of our ability to fight being overwhelmed. You see, other than just a quick note about how awesome Jesus is, it doesn't say much more about their boat trip. It says that they got to the other side of the lake, they healed some people, and it doesn't talk much about that. But I imagine there was something really bonding for the fact that in that moment, they were all moving in the same direction together. You know, the real reason that Peter got on that boat wasn't because he was super strong, though. It wasn't because he'd figured the whole thing out. He didn't suddenly become better at not being distracted or at multitasking. But I want you to see what Reverend Dawn Hutchings says about this. And I think she gives the last piece of insight that I want to share with you, and it's this. She says, as long as we continue to argue over whether or not it is possible for a man to walk upon the surface of the water or to calm a storm, either Jesus remains a mythical character or we suspend our understanding of reality. What a choice. It is impossible to live as Jesus lived as long as our image of Jesus is one that insists that Jesus had superpowers. As we talked about magic earlier, this dual reality that we experience, I think maybe the real truth, the real magic of this story isn't that somebody walked on the water. I don't know if that literally happened or not. There's a lot of scientific questions about maybe Jesus was walking on rocks or whatever. It doesn't matter. What is amazing to me is that Jesus understood something that many of us miss. Is that in this world where things seem to pull us in every direction, what we need is not magic, but community. What we need is not one more thing to do, but more people to do them with. You know, when everyone has their phone out all the time, it can be hard to be the one person to put it up. When everyone works 25 hours a day and 8 days a week, it can be hard to imagine what it would look like to take a day off. And when the system that we've grown up in says that oppression is normal, that you need to be involved in everything, and that FOMO is so real that if you don't do everything, you've done nothing, it can be hard to imagine what the world would look like without that. But that's why we have the venues. That's why we fight the opposite direction. That's why I am so thankful that for an hour, at least a week, we choose to come together and imagine a different world. We imagine a world driven by love because we've seen it exemplified here over and over. We see it modeled by the people who choose to volunteer in Kids Venue and not be in here so they can serve the children who are having a great time this morning with sensory processes. We see it modeled by the fact that the Women's Warriors part of the venues this week did a huge donation to Studi, and I literally heard teachers say that this was what enabled them to fund their classrooms because we gave every teacher there $150 in gift cards. That's what love looks like when you come together, where you don't just get distracted by the next new thing, but you push in on justice for the long haul. It's way easier to do it together. And if you'd like to figure out how we do that together, right here in this room here in just a few minutes, we're going to be having a social justice and response team meeting in here and a venues values group that's going to start over there and move over here. And in that time, you can figure out how collective action can help push against distraction by focusing on the main thing, which is making this community a place of love. And to me, that's the real magic trick of it all. Y'all, if you have questions about this, I would love to sit down and buy you a cup of coffee this week and answer them, or to send you a text back and forth this week and talk about it, because it's not easy to process this by yourself. We need to process it together. And if you'd love to do that, I'd love it if you would text me a question, and I'd buy you a coffee or another beverage this week, and we can figure out exactly how that works, okay? All right, with that said, I want to thank you all so much for joining us here, because it's your collective action coming together to step out of that distraction that really makes this possible, all right? Thank you so much.